We continue our look at the violence in Charlottesville this weekend with the consideration of its broader implications about race in this country. Joining me now from Nashville, Tennessee is historian John Meacham. Here in New York, Reverend Al Sharpton, founder and president of the National Action Network. I'm pleased to have them both on this program. Let me begin, John, with how you saw, as a fellow Southerner, how you saw the action in Charlottesville, a town that I suspect both of us have long admired because of its tradition there and its education and the University of Virginia and all of that.
Absolutely. It was a tragic example of a perennial American tradition of hate and alienation. I think it's been reported that these groups have started finding these blue dots, these blue cities, sometimes in red states, so that the drama is more pronounced. It's an old tactic. I think they've tragically taken it, perhaps from Dr. King. Reverend Al would know better than I would, but I think it was a critical point to pick the right place during the movement. Birmingham was a strategic choice because of Bull Connor. But what we're living in right now, in 2017, is a moment in which a president of the United States cannot find it in his heart or his mind, and one would hope he would find it in both places, ideally, to condemn what is self-evidently the darkest part of the American psyche. And I think that until we grapple with that, then we're going to have a continually frustrating conversation about these very important issues.
I'm not sure what the difference is. Are you suggesting that he can't find it in his heart because he's a racist, or he can't find it in his heart because he's blinded by political strategy?
I think the best thing you can say about the president's reaction on Saturday was that it was morally ambiguous. That's the best thing you can say. He governs to his base. That's clearly part of his political strategy. And his base includes people. It's not entirely people. I'm not saying that by any means, but it includes people like David Duke, who said this weekend that we voted for Trump to take our country back. That's what we got to do. That's what David Duke said, and the president, before he was the president, couldn't find it, again, in his heart or his mind to dissociate himself immediately from that kind of vitriol.
I think that he is right. When you look at the fact that many of those that were in this hate rally had on Trump caps, had on caps saying, "Make America Great," it was incumbent upon this president then to not only denounce it immediately, but to also say, and don't use my name, don't identify me with this. I remember when Bob Dole told hate groups, "I don't want your support. The exit sign is there for you at a convention center." This president, during the campaign, would not denounce David Duke for days, acting like he didn't hear the question or was ducking that. He has never taken them on. And it took 48 hours after a young lady was killed for him to denounce these people that engage in terrorism by name. He denounced the CEO of Merck for leaving his economic council today in less than an hour. 48 hours, and a young American woman is dead by a self-described white supremacist hate group. It is frightening to many Americans and an awakening call to others. Many of us have been saying all along that hate hasn't gone anywhere. It was just moved to the margins. It has now been emboldened.
Okay, but you're saying the hate hasn't gone anywhere, it just moved to the margins. America has changed in many ways. What hasn't it changed in terms of race?
I think America has made tremendous strides in many areas. When we look at just the social fabric in one generation. My mother was from Dothan, Alabama. She couldn't vote in her hometown till she was 39. She lived to me, her son, being able to run for president. And she lived to see a African-American president. We should never underestimate that. And the price paid to get us there. We see CEOs of major corporations. We see things that are astonishing that my mother and grandparents would never have imagined. But we still see the same economic gap. We're still doubly unemployed, the whites. We still have about 25 to 40% in terms of when you measure education, from the basics in educational opportunities, in healthcare disparities. So the life of the majority of African Americans is still at the same percentage points difference in major ways that you would count this and try and record the data as it was many years ago. It's just that because society has moved up, it may look better, but the gap is still there. And I think that we've not been honest about that. And I think in the euphoria of the election of President Obama, we started hearing people that are supposed to be intelligent say we're in a post-racial generation. We never was. We were able to achieve these things despite some of the racism and hate. It was not because they had disappeared, but because others persevered, black and white. And I think that many of us are now beginning to see again, because you don't have the hopeful picture of a President Obama who was inclusive, and others. Even George Bush. Charlie, I've dealt with the last three presidents. George Bush, I marched on Bill Clinton about welfare reform bills, but none of them would not address something as blatant as what we saw this weekend and take 2 days to do it.
And when he does do it, is it too little too late?
It's too little too late, and it was hopefully inadequate, because he did not address that this was domestic terrorism. He did not address that these people had associated themselves with him. These were not the Al Sharptons of the world that did. They did it. They put on their Trump hats. He had the responsibility to do that. When we've had marches and situations that people said things vile, we had to deal with it, and we should have. He had more of an obligation to do it as the President of the United States.
So
he's the president of everybody. You know, the easy way out is to call him a name, but that would be easy for me, and that would be easy for him. What I will say is that he has shown a real tendency to be a person that will use racism, that will use dog whistling, and will play to bigotry. And those of us that have known him in New York, he did that. The only race issue that I've ever known him to stand up for in New York, he comes from Queens, right next to Howard Beach. In '86, I was one of those leading those marches. I've never heard him address any bigotry all the way till now. The only race-related case was when he took out ads that he paid for in New York papers calling for the death penalty on 5 young black and Latino boys who were accused of the despicable act of Central Park rape. And they were found innocent, and he still said after the DNA the city should have never settled with them. So his only contribution to the racial dialogue in his hometown was to go against some young black and Latino young men that were found to be innocent, and he still wouldn't change.
John, do you think we will look back on it as a moment of change? Do you think that all that has happened in terms of the reaction to this? I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, look back, this is going to be an inflection point.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm skeptical of that, just because I think it's part of a tragic pattern. And I think it begins in our native region in the aftermath of Appomattox, where you had the founding of the Klan on Christmas Eve, 1865, not quite 8 months after General Lee surrendered to General Grant. You had the beginning of white resistance. The fires of hate are burned brightest when there are moments of economic and social stress. Reconstruction was that kind of moment. The beginning of the institution of Jim Crow in the 1890s. The Klan put 50,000 people in Washington in the middle of the 1920s, partly because of fears about immigrants coming out of the Bolshevik Revolution, anti-Semitism, anti-Catholicism, the Scopes trial, fear that the culture was becoming hostile to old-time religion, as the movie Inherit the Wind put it. You had the Cold War anxieties. You had the isolationism of Charles Lindbergh. You had the Birchers of the early 1960s. You had the anti-government sentiment of the mid-1990s when those innocent people, including the children in the daycare center, died when Timothy McVeigh bombed the Oklahoma City Federal Building. You have these moments when some part of the white population, frankly, feels alienated and dispossessed. And the reality of 2017 is that globalization and its discontents, the changing demography of the country, the changing idea that information age brains matter more than manufacturing age brawn, that's part of the anxiety. That's part of the reason Donald Trump is president, is because only 19% of people trust the federal government, and we're about $70,000 off the median income for a family of four to have a middle-class life. Those are the numbers that produced this. And so on the racial question, with all respect and affection to my friend Reverend Sharpton, it's not a dog whistle if everybody can hear it. And I think that's where we are right now.
Well, I think he's right. I think everyone did hear it, and I think a lot of people in the media was acting as if they didn't understand what they were hearing. And I think that when you have people feeling alienated and you have a candidate that blames the other, that started his political career by raising birtherism. The president is unlike us. It's them, it's somebody else, and he goes from there to Mexicans, and from there to Islamophobia with Muslims. It's the there, it's the them, it's not your fault. When globalization, automation has cost a lot more jobs than immigration, but this president has not put a plan in. He didn't run on that. And this kind of comforting people with bigotry is dangerous. And I would hope that it is this period, but we don't know that it is. We're trying to do what we can. And I've had to, in my own career, wrestle with, you've got to deal openly and say, no, I'm not going to be with those elements. I'm not going to deal with violence. I've had to deal with that. I'm not saying anything that a lot of public figures haven't had to struggle with, which is why I'm saying he knows better. Every one of us knows when you're around extremists that you need to say, wait a minute, I'm going to part companies. He knows better. He ought to stand up for the good of the country and his own legacy. Do I expect him to? No. But I would love for him to fool us.
You're saying he doesn't stand up because of his political ambition or because he is at heart a racist?
I don't know. I don't know the reason. I know the actual behavior. And I don't want to psychoanalyze him, but I can say I know what I see. And what I see, whatever the motive, the results are the same.
John, is this also simply the fact that after slavery we never healed all of the impact of slavery?
You know, I think the
Ta-Nehisi Coates and people like that are, as you know, are writing.
Yeah. It's the American dilemma.
Right.
There are two original sins in American life. There's Native American removal and African American slavery. And slavery is wrapped up in the fabric of the country. Read the Constitution. When Jefferson wrote that all men were created equal, he had a very narrow understanding of what the definition of men was. The story of the country, the beauty of the country, is that however tragic, however bloody, however slow, we have in fact tried to become a more perfect union. It's not a perfectible journey. It's not something we're going to achieve on this side of paradise. But we have always become stronger the wider we've opened our arms. And that's what makes, and it's easy to say these are fringe groups and it's on the margin and perhaps we're overreacting. I disagree. I think that you have these moments where the extremes, the hate, the people who are out there giving Nazi salutes after we spent so much blood and treasure trying to liberate the world from that form of tyranny. That is an extreme manifestation, but it's an extreme manifestation of an underlying reality. And the underlying reality is there is an enormous unease in the country, and it is easier to point your finger, as Al was just saying, and say that an immigrant is responsible or a black person is responsible, and it's not me. And I would recommend everybody read, once I'm sure a lot of folks have, but Richard Hofstadter's essay called The Paranoid Style in American Politics.
Right.
It was a lecture in 1963. It was a cover story of Willie Morris's Harper's in October 1964. It won't take long, and you will see that from the Bavarian Illuminati of the 1790s through the Birchers unto Charlottesville, Virginia this week, you have these moments where the dispossessed want to blame someone else. And the difference we have now is that the president himself is one of the people doing the pointing.
Does it matter? He mentioned Thomas Jefferson. He wrote a biography of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had slaves.
Yeah, I read it. Had slaves and children with the slaves.
Exactly.
And it does matter.
Therefore, should they take down the
I
Jefferson
think
Memorial?
that people need to understand when people that were enslaved and robbed of even the right to marry and had forced sex with their slave masters, this is personal to us. My great-grandfather was a slave in South Carolina owned by the family that ended up, Strom Thurmond was one of them. A newspaper had discovered it. So this is personal. This is not some kind of removed discussion from us. Our families were victims of this. Certainly they ought to be removed.
Therefore, everybody associated with slavery in terms of any public monument to them.
When you look at the fact that public monuments are supported by public funds, you're asking me to subsidize the insult of my family.
Thomas Jefferson had slaves.
And I would repeat that the public should not be paying to uphold somebody who has had that kind of background. You have private museums, you have other things that you may want to do that. But that's not even the issue here, Charlie.
What is the
We're
issue?
talking about here a open display of bigotry announced and over again pronounced. And then followed up by not just violence, but terrorism, and the president won't even speak to it. And this, you know, on August 28, 1963, Dr. King's speech, I Have a Dream, he stood there and talked about Lincoln's promise. You know, we talk about the dream, Lincoln's promise. This year, 2 weeks from now, Monday, we're bringing white, black, Muslim clergy to Washington, 1,000, to stand there and proclaim that dream. To stand there and think about how Martin Luther King just dreamed when we were still in the back of the bus by law then. We went all the way to a Barack Obama. And now, 2 weeks before we recognize that day, we see Charlottesville and a president that has laryngitis for 2 days on that issue. It's something that many of us are going to stand aggressively and nonviolently in the King tradition and say
the Attorney General announced today there's going to be a rigorous investigation. I said to him this morning at CBS this morning, you know, is this your highest priority, and can you make sure that you will get to the bottom of this? Attorney General said yes. Now, Attorney General is an associate of the president that you're criticizing.
Well, he's an associate of the president that we will see what he does, but it's the same Attorney General who we met with, the heads of 5 civil rights organizations, that told us he was going to withdraw from the voting rights lawsuit in Texas that we consider biased. And the same Attorney General that wanted to stop the consent decree in Baltimore that had already been agreed to by the Justice Department. The same Attorney General, we saw a memo talking about reversing affirmative action. So if we're not jumping up and down applauding this Attorney General, it's because of the positions that he's taken. But we'll wait and see.
The president, John, faces lots of challenges. We know North Korea is a national security challenge. I mean, is this a national challenge?
I think it's a challenge and an ongoing one because it goes to the moral credibility of the person behind the desk in the Oval Office. Franklin Roosevelt said that the presidency is preeminently a place of moral leadership. We have to be in a position, both as a country and as a global community, where we believe what the president says, where you have some innate confidence that things are in fairly good hands. And I think that for a lot of people, that level of confidence started low, and it's gotten to be almost non-existent. And so I think that it's an exacerbating moment. It's yet another example of a place where the president had an opportunity, tragically, because there's a woman who is dead, 2 state troopers who are dead because of this attempt to put neo-Nazism back in the front of the American imagination. because of that, there are people who are dead. And this is a moment where a president could have spoken beyond the 34 or 36% of the people who approve of his job.
Okay, let me ask you this, because this is what you tweeted on Saturday. History will judge the president's wordplay over resurgent white nationalism harshly. History will judge the president's wordplay over resurgent white nationalism harshly, and sooner, I think, than he realizes. What did you mean by that?
I think that this is not about we're going to look back in a certain number of years and realize that this man was not commensurate with the challenges and the dignity of his office. I think that it's unfolding in real time. I think that this is a man who was disqualified, in my view, from the office, in part by alluding to the fact that Second Amendment advocates should take care of Hillary Clinton. And I think that he has encouraged violence. I think that he has, in a way, tacitly and perhaps even explicitly enabled very dark impulses to unfold in the life of the country.
Think this president will last 4 years?
I don't know if he will. I think that we are very, very close to seeing a president just implode. I don't
What does
know.
implode mean?
Implode in the sense, politically implode, in the sense that he losing the confidence of many Americans that not only can he be moral, but just decent. The president that responds like off the hip quickly to everything couldn't find his voice when a young woman dies with an obvious victimization of a terrorist act. I think that a lot of people are saying it's not only moral, it's just decent. How do you not respond to that? How do you not pick up the phone and call her family and say Americans are with you? How do you have to be pushed into saying the most basic and even then most removed from any personal kind of identity with what this situation could have been even indirectly encouraged by your actions or lack of them? I don't know how you do that and maintain the confidence of the American public, including many of them that voted for you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Sharpton. Thank you, John.
Thank you,
John
Charles.
Meacham. We'll be back. Stay with us.